Hello there, people, and welcome to Flight Review. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me here for my review show here at theflightcast.com. Today, I'm talking about a streaming movie that was the big hit, or at least the big talk of social media for the past couple of days. Section 31, the new Star Trek film that released on Paramount+. And this isn't going to necessarily be a long episode because initially, I was in fire and brimstone mode, and I was really going to let some people have it, and I still might. Truthfully, because a lot of the vitriol and a lot of the nasty gatekeeping and disgusting shit from Star Trek fans has definitely reared its head with respect to this film. But I tell you what, I'm not going to spend too much time belaboring those idiots. I've just blocked so many of them on BLUESKY, which is sad. It's unfortunate. BLUESKY is definitely the best of the social media networks right now, but that does not mean that there are not toxic gatekeepers on it. There most certainly are, and we know that they're present in every fandom, and had to unfollow some people, unfortunately, because I'm just not willing to deal with any bullshit with respect to this. I really don't. Has nothing to do with whether or not you like Section 31 or not. It has everything to do with how you go about it, right? If you just say, hey, it wasn't for me, I didn't care for it, but I'm glad, and even as condescending as this can be, I'm glad you liked it, right? As condescending as that can be, that's still better than the people that are like, oh my god, kill it with fire, this is the worst Star Trek thing that's ever been made. It's not even Star Trek. It resembles nothing to the original franchise. It's ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. There's some former people, some former mutuals on Twitter that write for bigger publications that gave this a 1 out of 4, and of course it contributed to the Bane review site, Rotten Tomatoes, the absolute horrid hell site that way too many people base their opinions on. And he had the same complaints that everybody else had. That boils down to the same sentence, of course. They didn't do what I wanted them to do. But, I'm not going to talk for a ton about them after I give my thoughts on the film. You can already kind of guess where I'm at with the film, at least not in a vitriolic sense. But you should know that already with respect to any review that I give. I don't review movies that just to categorically shit on them. Even Thor: Love and Thunder. For people who have been listening to me for the last number of years, if you listen to my review of Thor: Love and Thunder, and I consider that to be movie 34, like if the Marvel Cinematic Universe has 34 films, right? I think Thor: Love and Thunder is literally number 34 if I'm ranking them all in order from worst to best. And even still, I manage not to, kill it with fire, not to set it ablaze. Best I said was, hey, I like the third act, which I do. I do like the third act. I own that movie because you can't own part of a set, but it's not one that I'm jumping out to watch again in that regard. So I was never going to firebomb this film, even if I didn't actually like it. But I'll get into that here in a little bit. Before diving headfirst into the review, I do want to remind people, for those of you who are brand new listeners, if you found me on BLUESKY or elsewhere, you can find my shows every week at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcast. This show is available on Apple Podcasts. It's available on YouTube at the Flightcast YouTube page. It's also available on both Pandora and Spotify as well. Just search for the Flightcast or Flightcast. Either way, you will find this show every week. There's the main show that I did an episode of last week. There's also Flight Chat, which I finally got caught up on old emails. There weren't a ton from a ton of different people, but there were definitely a lot of emails to get through over the last month and a half or so since I got sick. So we finally did an episode of Flight Chat, and Anthony Dorsey has already sent a new email missive for the next episode, which won't be this week. It'll be next weekend, but the next Flight Chat episode. I think we're going to do every other week for Flight Chat episodes. But that's the feedback show if you want to send in your emails for feedback to get read out over the show and for responses and for conversation in general. Nerdy fandom conversation and talks about franchises and whatnot. And then, of course, this show, Flight Review. At some point, I'll also do more episodes of Flight Box for the TV shows, because that's the TV show review that I do in that regard. But yeah, all those can be found at theflightcast.com or, again, on Apple Podcast, on YouTube at the Flightcast YouTube channel, on Pandora, and on Spotify as well. And, of course, I'm going to take a moment to thank all of the very loyal supporters of patreon.com/theflightcast who are still there. I know a number of people have dropped off, but everybody that is still there, thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for your support. It is humbling to know that there are still people out there that actually give a shit about what I say and actually, want to listen to what I have to say on an extra tip with financial support. So patreon.com/theflightcast is where you can find all that, with bonus episodes and bonus stuff being posted there as well. Thank you so much for supporting it. And thank you to anybody who wishes to support it in the not too distant future. All right, let's get into it. My thoughts on Star Trek Section 31. And let me start by saying this. For anybody that doesn't know my background with respect to the franchise of Star Trek, it is, without question, my number one favorite franchise of all time. There is nothing that eclipses it. Not Batman, not DC, not Marvel, not Star Wars, nothing. Star Trek is my number one favorite franchise of all time, and has been that way for at least the last 34 years. Because I started watching it when I was 9, way back in 1991, during season 5 of Star Trek The Next Generation. The first episode of that I ever saw was The Game, the episode where Wesley Crusher came back and he and Ashley Judd had to fight against that evil game that was like changing everybody's brains and making them psychotropically addicted. That was the first episode that I ever watched on Fox 50 WKBD in Detroit at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night. And then later that night at 11, I watched The Enterprise Incident, Season 3, Episode 2 of the original series. Those are the first episodes of Star Trek I ever watched. I've been hooked ever since. There is very little about this franchise that I don't know, outside of the TV show Enterprise, because it's the only Star Trek show that I have not seen in its entirety. I've seen all the rest. Well, Prodigy. I have to add Prodigy into that as well, because I've not watched Prodigy yet. But all the other shows, I seriously am a massive fan of all of it. I don't like every episode, but seriously, I have an open mind for all eras of Star Trek, whether it's the original series, whether it's TNG, whether it's DS9, whether it's Voyager. At some point, I will revisit Enterprise, and I will watch Prodigy. I most certainly will. And the new stuff as well. I love Discovery. I own the entire series of Star Trek Discovery. I own both of the first 2 seasons of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I have Star Trek Lower Decks Steelbook pre-ordered. That's coming out in March. I will have that entire show. I have all of Star Trek Picard. There is very little about Star Trek that I dislike. There are certain episodes, there are certain things, certain characters here and there. But generally speaking, I have a very open favorite of mine when it comes to this franchise. I know what it is. I have lived it, ate it, breathed it, slept it, shit it, if you will. Like, that is my number one die-hard franchise, okay? Just getting that out there. This is not a novice talking to you. This is not a noob. This is not somebody that's never seen any of the show. I've seen more of it than most humans would care to ever see. And oh yes, I also enjoy the Kelvin timeline. My favorite of those 3 movies is Star Trek Beyond. It's a 2-hour-long episode of the original series, and it's amazing. Anyway, I'm bringing all that up just so that you are clear, if you've never heard me talk about Star Trek before, just so that you're clear on where my pedigree is and how long I have been watching this franchise and how long I have been a fan of it, so there aren't any excuses thrown out about my thoughts later, like, oh, well, he doesn't know, he doesn't understand what. Yes, I do. I understand all of it. Most certainly I do. And here are my thoughts, with all that aside, on Section 31. High-level thoughts. I liked it. Seriously, unironically, I liked the movie. Because going into the movie, I actually understood what it was and what it was going to be. And that's the biggest thing that kind of confounds me with Star Trek fans today that are just absolutely like taking a blowtorch to it is, what did you expect from those trailers? What did you expect from the premise? What did you expect from everything that we had seen about the film? Did you really go into that movie thinking that we were going to see Deep Space Nine? That we were going to see that approximation of Section 31? Did you really go into that movie thinking that we were going to see this drawn-out, slow, political drama? Is that really what you thought? Did you believe that it was going to be a lot of character acting and a lot of, grand and glorious Picard speeches and stuff with Giorgio speaking on the top of a pulpit? Is that really what you thought? Did you think it was going to be classic morality tale Star Trek? I don't know why you thought that, but it's your own fault if that's what you went into this movie thinking. Seriously. The Paramount Plus era of Star Trek is indeed an experimental one. And you know why? Because they're trying to bring in a new audience to the franchise, which means they're not going to just regurgitate TNG. They're not just going to regurgitate DS9 or Voyager or any of the older shows. They're going to go in different directions. That's why Discovery isn't a regurgitation. And a lot of people, whether they admit it or not, I think that's why they take aim at it. And they want to guide it. Fans do this all the time, where they rationalize what they don't like about a show or a movie by saying, oh, well, it's wrong because they didn't get the character dynamics right. They didn't write it properly. They didn't do this. They didn't do that. When at the end of the day, all fans need to do is look in the mirror and admit to themselves that you're upset that they didn't do what you wanted them to do. And that's all this is. Star Trek Section 31, for anybody that dislikes it strongly, it didn't do what you wanted it to do. And it's fine to admit that. You would actually get more respect if you simply admitted that. All fans and all fandoms would get more respect if they admitted that. But there are definitely times where the Star Trek fandom is just as gatekeepery and just as toxic as Star Wars, as Marvel, DC. There's toxicity in all of these fandoms, seriously. And it goes into the prior expectations and what you think Star Trek should be. Anybody that comes out and says this movie is not Star Trek, that's subjectively false. It is a Star Trek film. It is in the Star Trek universe. It is Star Trek Section 31. You can't say that it's not a Star Trek movie. You can believe that it isn't one, but the title and the affiliations and the character connections objectively prove you're wrong. You can feel however you want, but you look silly when you say that this isn't Star Trek, because it objectively is Star Trek. It's not the Star Trek you grew up with. It's not the Star Trek that you know and love. It's not the Star Trek that you prefer. It's a different Star Trek. You know who it's for? It's for my fiance, Shonda, who didn't grow up with TNG, didn't grow up with DS9, didn't grow up with Voyager or any of the older shows, but did watch the Kelvin timeline films, enjoyed those, and has enjoyed Discovery. And she's trying to get into Lower Decks, but she really didn't get into Lower Decks because she thinks that Beckett Mariner is annoying. That's just her own personal, preference with respect to, how Tawny Newsom plays that character. It is what it is. But she also likes Strange New Worlds, right? So she's a fan of Discovery and she's a fan of Strange New Worlds. She watched Section 31 with me on Friday night. She enjoyed it. She is the new guard. She is the new fan that Paramount Plus is trying to bring into the franchise. And I say this all the time, guys, for anybody that's listening to me when I talk about theatrically released movies, for Marvel and DC and Star Wars. And when I tell you about how this, I get into numbers. Somebody on Reddit tried to argue me down on this because I told them the thing that I've said a lot of times here, where when it comes to the total audience, 5 to 10%, if we're lucky, of the total audience is fans, diehard fans. That other 90 to 95% is general audience that is relatively uninitiated to the fandom that we are connected to the franchise that we hold near and dear to our hearts in that regard, right? So that means that when these movies are released, when these shows and these projects are released, we're not the target. We're not. We're not the primary target. They already have our attention. They already have our dollars, if you will, because we're all subscribed to Paramount Plus. We all have the app, or we all buy the movie tickets and go see it. We're going to see it. Even if it's to hate watch it, we'll see it. And I'm sure plenty of Star Trek fans hate watch this. Because this whole thing, I saw some people post about how, I couldn't wait for it to be over. Dude, you were at home and could have pressed stop on your remote at any point in time. You wanted to hate watch it. You wanted to be a dick about it. And fans love acting entitled about that shit. And you know what? If that's how you want to be about this, that's fine. But for me, it was Star Trek Suicide Squad. That's the best way that I can approximate it. Star Trek Suicide Squad. No, it's not like Sloane and Section 31 in DS9. It's not supposed to be. It's not even necessarily like Leland and Section 31 in Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery. No, it's different. It is a ragtag group of misfits that were assembled for a particular mission. It's Star Trek Suicide Squad. If that's not your cup of tea, if that's not your flavor, fine. That's perfectly okay. But just admit that instead of calling it wrong, and instead of being so butthurt about it and acting like, oh my goodness, this could be crippling for the franchise. I'm in fear. Why are you in fear, first of all? You know what? We'll talk about that later. I'm getting into a lot of the reactions to this film and not getting so much into my own. I enjoyed it for what it was, truthfully, to be honest with you. And I see no reason to firebomb it because it's just another entry in the Star Trek universe with respect to, the world at large. It's a world-building movie in that regard. Oh, here's a story that isn't on the Enterprise. Here's a story that isn't on the Discovery. Here's a story that isn't anywhere on a Federation starship. It's in the outskirts of wherever, and let's deal with this particular situation. That's all it is, truthfully. It's an action movie. It's a Star Trek action movie, even more so than the Kelvin timeline films were. So, whatever. I enjoyed it for what it was. I like Star Trek. I love Star Trek, and I like action movies. So, I was good with respect to that. Those are my high-level thoughts to start this off. So let's break it down a little bit further. How about the cast? The cast is dynamite. Truthfully, the cast plays their roles, and it starts with Michelle Yeoh. Michelle Yeoh is a badass. Michelle Yeoh is fantastic. I have thoroughly enjoyed the fact that Michelle Yeoh, who finally, got her flowers for Everything Everywhere All at Once and won the Oscar for that, and has had such a storied career, has been in a number of different franchises, Marvel and the like. James Bond, that was the first thing I ever saw her in, was Tomorrow Never Dies, in the second Pierce Brosnan James Bond film, right? She's amazing. She's badass. And I've loved her character of Philippa Georgiou, Emperor Philippa Georgiou, from the moment she was introduced in the first season of Discovery. So the idea of, a movie starring her? Yes, of course. And she's badass. Seriously, I have nothing bad to say about Michelle Yeoh in this film, and I'm not going to. I also have nothing bad to say about Amari Hardwick. And I don't have a whole lot of personal exposure to Omari Hardwick's work, because I never watched Power. I didn't watch Power on Stars, but I did watch Army of the Dead. He is an Army of the Dead and, Zack Snyder film, zombies film, and he was good in that film. I like him in this movie because the energy that he brings and the gravitas and the vibrancy that he brings absolutely matches Michelle Yeoh throughout the film. They drive this film, the both of them. They most certainly do, and I love that. Not just because of how strong they are as actors, but also representation matters. There you have it, an Asian female lead and a black male co-lead. Hell yes, absolutely. That's quintessential Star Trek, for crying out loud, for people that want to argue that point. Are you kidding me? Right then and there in the structure of the damn cast, it's right there. And they were both dynamite. They were absolutely the two best actors in this film by far. But I will give some special shout-outs to Sam Richardson as Quasi and also to Casey Roll as... I don't want to say her name. I'm not going to say her name because that's actually a spoiler, right? But Casey Roll plays a Starfleet officer that is a younger version. This is spoiler free. She plays a younger version of a Star Trek character that longtime fans like myself very much know. In fact, when I first heard the name of the movie last night, I was like, wait a minute, that's so-and-so. Yes, it is, most certainly. And I like it. I really like it because that's an Easter egg that longtime fans are absolutely going to latch on to and pick up when they hear that. I thought that she and Sam Richardson were really good. Sam Richardson is also playing a character that is a throwback to another type of Star Trek character that we saw in a Star Trek feature film, and quite honestly, a type of character that wasn't necessarily like developed further, if you will. They kind of went in a different direction with respect to characters that can shapeshift, if you will. But this particular character can, and yeah, I thought the both of them, Sam Richardson as Quasi and Casey Roll as her Starfleet officer character, were really good. I really liked it. There's the support that they lent to this cast with respect to that. Robert Kaczynski, he plays Zeph. He's got this mechanical exoskeleton. He's the meathead. He's the stupid meathead that you see in any action movie. Okay, all right, you know what he is. You know what he's going to do. You know how it's going to go. Okay, whatever. I can, take it or leave it. I know that he fits a role in a movie like this. All right, fine. It is what it is. I didn't have any issues with him. First time I'd seen him in anything, I forgot that he was in Pacific Rim, the first Pacific Rim movie. I completely forgot about that. But yeah, he was cool. He's been in a bunch of other stuff, but I didn't have any issues with him whatsoever. There are people that have issues with Sven Roygrok and how he played the character Fuzz, specifically with the accents that he uses. And, I think that creatively speaking, they made an intentional choice for the character to use bad accents because the character doesn't understand what the accent actually is. Because he actually uses that actor uses two different accents throughout the film. One mostly through the film, and then another one at a particular point in the film. And they're both bad. They're both stereotypical. And I guess from a PC standpoint, there are people that may be up in arms about it in that regard. I wasn't, because, it wasn't an accent that necessarily pertains to Black Americans, I'll say that. If you're somebody that is of the persuasion that he's speaking the accent in the movie, that's your business. If you want to be offended by it, I thought it was just a fish out of water situation. But his character was all right. I didn't necessarily, gravitate toward that character. But again, in this Suicide Squad type setup, I understood the existence of his character and also the craziness of how his character was constructed in that regard. There's some other actors in here. James Hiroyuki Liao, who plays a character named San. I think that there's some definite weight and whatnot behind his portrayal of that character, no doubt about it. And then there is a character that there's a special cameo, a special all-star cameo that I'm pretty sure you hear throughout at one point earlier in the film, and then you actually see that person at the end of the movie. And again, I'm not going to give that one away because it's definitely a spoiler, and I decided to stay spoiler-free with this one in case any of you have not watched this film. But it's an awesome cameo. And all I will say is that it is a cameo that is directly related to Michelle Yeoh. I'll put it that way. Somebody that absolutely was part of her flowers throughout her career, maybe even recently, that now is a part of the Star Trek universe, and I love it. I do. I love it. I absolutely love it. So I really don't have a whole lot of complaints whatsoever with respect to this cast, with respect to Section 31, truthfully. I don't think there's a ton to say about the writing here because, like I said, it's an action movie, and there's not a whole lot necessarily with action movies. Although I will say, with respect to the main story, this really is a story about Philippa Georgiou and San. It's really about those two characters. That's the best way that I can describe with respect to like character development and any of the more emotional beats in this film. It really is their movie as far as the story is concerned. That's the most that I will say without, diving into any big spoilers about it. But, Craig Sweeney wrote the screenplay for this. And, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the production on this. I do know that originally they had talked about this being a show. And there are the people that don't like the film, that are disparaging it or saying, well, this is what happens when you try to fit an entire season of a show into 1 hour and a half long movie. Maybe, okay, whatever. But truthfully, if you were looking for more depth, if you were looking for something bigger with respect to that, okay, then maybe you can feel disappointed about it. But I think for what they did in terms of making it an action film, I mean, I don't really look at this as necessarily a forgettable action film. I mean, it's a TV film in that regard, right? So if you want to call it standard action fare, okay, but it's still entertaining. It's still entertaining to me. And it's not like one where I'm going to be like, oh, well, you remember that moment? You remember this moment? Which I think that's what a lot of fans are looking for a lot of times with this. And with a story like this, it doesn't need to be that, because this isn't, again, this is not the Enterprise. This isn't Deep Space Nine. This isn't like the main characters of anything else that we have seen. So like the pressure and the expectations really don't need to be that high. They really don't, in my opinion. And so I think that also extends with the writing. If you're writing a Star Trek action movie for television, which is what this is how you do it. This is how you put it together. And there doesn't need to be a ton there. But again, the stuff that is there, the more powerful stuff, the more emotional beats that are there with Georgiou's character and with San's character, I really did like. I really did enjoy that stuff, right? The writing along those lines in that regard. The rest of it, I don't think was bad. I really don't think it was bad. It was just, all right, it's your standard action movie. And if that's not what you're looking for, standard action film, well, then that's your business. If you wanted something more in-depth, that's fine. But it's not like Star Trek does this all the damn time, seriously. Like, even the Kelvin Timeline films had some more depth in it. Now, that being said, do I think that this film is at the bottom of, like, the list with respect to Star Trek movies? No. On one hand, I don't know that it's necessarily fair to compare them to the others because it's a TV movie as opposed to a theatrically released film. There is a difference. Okay, regardless of runtime, there most certainly is a difference in that regard. But still, I don't think I would put this at the bottom. I still think I would watch Section 31 over Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, if I was, going to rank them in that regard. But again, I have a wide strike zone when it comes to Star Trek, and that definitely serves me well in situations like this, where so many other fans in the franchise are making themselves miserable over the fear of how this movie could kill the franchise, which that is so laughable to me. But whatever. The writing was okay. It wasn't great. It wasn't like anything to write home about. It was solid. It was fine in that regard. I really had no issues with it, truthfully, as an action film. The much bigger critique when it comes to films like this, action films, is the visuals. And there are definitely visuals in this film that I really like, and there are other visuals that aren't that great. Somebody had brought up, I think it was either on Reddit or in a Discord group, that they didn't necessarily like the composition of the fight sequences because they felt that they weren't shot all that well and that they didn't display Michelle Yeoh's fighting ability all that well. And while I do see where they're coming from with that, I also have to remember that as much as Michelle Yeoh is, I'm sure, in shape at this point in her life, she's 62. Okay? So there's only so much that she can still do. And I'm sure there's a lot more that she can do than I can and that a number of others can, right? Because she's been in shape her whole damn life in that regard. But, let's give a little bit of grace with respect to how the action sequences are shot, how the stunt stuff is shot. Okay, it wasn't like Batman Begins. Okay, anybody that has seen Batman Begins and all the terrible, subjectively speaking, in my opinion, the terrible editing with respect to the fight sequences there, no, it wasn't quite like that in that regard. For people who have seen Batman Begins, I feel like a number of you listening to this have seen that movie and you know what I'm talking about. No, it's not like that. There's definitely some more fluidic action and some more choreography displayed in this movie than there is in that. But, some of it, there were times where they do some camera movements, and this is where the director, whose name I will try to pronounce this properly, Olatunde Osunsanmi, who he has really become, like, other than Jonathan Frakes, he's like the big director with respect to Star Trek, the Paramount Plus era, several episodes of Star Trek Discovery. He is like the man to direct new Star Trek in this, you will, right? The Paramount Plus stuff, Discovery, short treks, and now Section 31. Like this is, he brought the style that he's honed and crafted in Discovery to this film in terms of how he moves the camera, in terms of the lighting, in terms of what they do visually speaking, and I mean it matches. It absolutely matches what we've seen in that show, in Discovery in particular. So I really had no issues visually speaking with respect to that. The visual effects were fantastic. I really had no issues with that, but I've always been a fan of the visual effects in Discovery and certainly Strange New Worlds and Picard. Like, I really haven't had a whole lot to complain about, but I have a wide strike zone when it comes to visual effects anyway. So, nothing visually in this film really like stuck out to me. I was like, oh crap, well, can't believe that. No. And also, I did like some of the visual representations of the Easter eggs, because there are a ton of Easter eggs. For people that say that this does not connect itself well to the rest of the franchise, I really don't know what you're talking about, because there were so many Easter eggs. Aliens, places, locations, things it's said and spoken, heard. Like, I don't understand how you can argue that this wasn't connected. You know what? It wasn't connected to the rest of the franchise the way that you wanted. But the Easter eggs were absolutely there. The connective tissue was most certainly there. You watch this movie, it takes place in the world of Star Trek. In the prime timeline, no less. You know that. Okay? Seriously. So, visually speaking, I really didn't have any complaints, any big complaints whatsoever, to be honest with you. Jeff Russo, who is the Paramount Plus era Star Trek composer, Star Trek Discovery, short treks, Star Trek Picard, at least the first 2 seasons of Star Trek Picard, and certainly Star Trek Strange New Worlds. He did the main theme for that. He scores Section 31. There wasn't really anything in his score for Section 31 that necessarily stood out to me, like some of the beats that I've heard in those other shows. There are certain parts of those other shows where I really like what he does, but even though he did the theme for the main theme for Stranger Worlds, he does not compose that show. That's Nami Melamad who does that show, and I love her scores for Strange New Worlds. But it wasn't anything that was just out of place, right? Like there are a couple of things that a score can do in a film, right? It can either vibe well, or it can feel out of place, or it can just kind of be there. This one was just kind of there. There wasn't a whole lot in it that necessarily stood out to me with respect to Russo's composition for this. Not bad, but not great in that regard. It was just all right. It's okay for things to be all right. Not everything has to be, on the level of Jerry Goldsmith and Elliot Goldenthal's score for, or not Elliot Goldenthal, Cliff Idleman's score for Star Trek 6: The Undiscovered Country. No, not everything has to be this incredible operatic thing. It doesn't have to be Dennis McCarthy or Jay Chataway. I'm naming Star Trek composers here. No, it doesn't have to be this grand and glorious thing. Sometimes it can literally just be there, especially for a film that is not about any of our major characters in the Star Trek universe, about a ragtag Suicide Squad group of characters. It is what it is. So, nothing out of place with Jeff Russo's score, but nothing necessary to write home about either. It's just fine. And there's nothing wrong with being just fine. And that is ultimately my theme for my final thoughts about Section 31. It's just fine. It's not anything that's like, oh my goodness, what an incredible film. It's also not, oh my goodness, Kill It With Fire, it's not Star Trek. It's neither. It's in between, or maybe a little higher than that midpoint, right? At least for me, right? Because I can still enjoy it. I can still have fun with the jokes. I can still have fun with the tone. I can still have fun with the humor. I can still enjoy the cast, which that's probably the biggest thing that I do enjoy about this film is the cast. The cast and the visuals definitely are the biggest things that I enjoy. No, the writing is not the greatest, but I know plenty of Star Trek episodes and movies that are worse than this in terms of writing. Subjectively speaking, of course. It's all subjective. So, I'm not holding this movie's feet to the fire and acting like, oh my goodness, I can't believe how far the franchise has fallen. No, I the fanboy expectations that we play, the entitlement that we place on films, on projects like this is insane to me, and not everybody's like that, and a lot of times when I bring this up, people like to conflate and say, well, what, you're saying we have to like it? No, I'm not saying you have to like everything that they do in the Paramount Plus era of Star Trek. No, I'm not saying you have to like this film. I'm not saying you have to like Discovery. I'm not saying you have to like Picard or even Strange New Worlds, although that's the darling, right? That's the darling for all the gatekeepers. They love Strange New Worlds, just like how Superman and Lois was the darling for all the Superman fans that hate Man of Steel but love Superman the movie, right? Whatever. I'm not saying you have to like it. All I'm saying is this toxicity and kill it with fire and oh my god, I've watched it so you don't have to. And then F all that noise. Seriously, those people are blocked. Those are the dregs of the fan base. And I don't care if they dwarf me on Reddit. I don't care if they dwarf me on Blue Sky. It's bullshit. Those people have no place in the franchise. We've gotten to this point with criticism, especially with social media, where we believe that we can say whatever the hell we want. We can be as toxic, we can be as mean, we can be as derogatory as we want, and it's all fair game. No, it's not. You're an asshole. Seriously, if you're sitting there trying to dissuade people from watching the movie and saying, oh, this is not real Trek, don't touch it with a 10-foot pole, you're an asshole. You're absolutely an asshole, and you're trying to lead everybody else into thinking your way. And you take yourself way too seriously, especially when it comes to these franchises. And that could be said for so many of these franchises, right? Fans take themselves and their beliefs and their expectations way too seriously. And when these franchises don't do what they wanted them to do, it's like, oh my goodness, this is the biggest affront and the biggest the biggest wave of disrespect. I can't believe that they would do that to my beloved franchise. It's not your beloved franchise. These studios don't owe you shit. They put something out there, and you decide whether or not you're going to enjoy it. There are people out there, believe it or not, myself included, that enjoy Star Trek Section 31. Not everyone does, and I don't even give a shit if most people don't. I don't. I do not care. Because that most people that don't, right, are probably not the general audience. The general audience either watched this movie and went all right with it, because they went in uninitiated like my fiance did, or they're not seeing the movie. And that's a bigger issue with respect to Paramount's marketing and how they're going to, push this forward, But for people that want to call this movie a flop or a bomb because it has a terrible Rotten Tomato score with both the audience and the critics, yeah, that's bullshit. You can't measure streaming movies as flops or successes unless the studio tells you otherwise, right? We're still in that point where the studios are self-reporting numbers, and there's no box office attached to this. So you literally, objectively speaking, cannot call Section 31 a flop. You can say that you don't like it, and you can say that you know a lot of people that don't like it. You can say that you perceive it as a bad film, but under no circumstances is there any objective measure that it is a flop or a success until Paramount tells us so. And that's going to be in whatever data they report. We leave it up to them, and they're in the middle of, some new ownership groups taking over the whole Skydance merger. We'll see what goes on. But as far as anybody being fearful of the future of Star Trek, why? Strange New Worlds Season 3 is set to release this year. Season 4 just started filming, went to production, right? And we've still got the Tawny Newsome, right? That Star Trek situational comedy that they're doing, right? With respect to that. I mean, I know Lower Decks did just end, and I know Prodigy is still, I think it's still floating or it just ended. I'm not sure, whichever. But this idea that Star Trek is just going to die because Section 31 was subjectively bad to a decent amount of longtime fans is bullshit. Absolutely ridiculous. It's arguably, and I say arguably because it's really inarguable, it's Paramount's largest IP by far. It is their biggest IP. There's no question about it. Bigger than Transformers? Yes, it is. It's been around for 56, 57 years. Actually, pardon me, 58 years now. In fact, this year is the 59th year of Star Trek. Next year is the 60th anniversary of the franchise. It's been around longer than Transformers. It's been around longer than Ninja Turtles, Nickelodeon, anything else, okay? So it is by far Paramount's biggest IP, and you think they're just going to ditch that because Section 31 may or may not have worked for them? And really, again, it comes down to what they see in their numbers, whether or not they think it helped Paramount Plus gain viewers, gain subscribers, whatever it is, whatever their metrics are, they determine it. We don't have an actual metric to objectively. It's not like box office. So you can dislike it all you like, but you have nothing objective to call it a flop or otherwise with respect to how much money it has earned, or because it's just not the same. It's a streaming movie, and this would be the case with any and all streaming movies in this regard as well. So that's where we're at with it. And, for me, I don't take myself so seriously with these fandoms. I really don't. I know who these movies are aimed at, and I know that the general audience is the primary target to try and get new people in. Now, whether new people come in on this movie or not remains to be seen. Again, we'll find out when Paramount tells us. But for me, this doesn't make or break anything for me. I had fun watching it. It is what it is. Do I hold it in the same regard as Wrath of Khan and Undiscovered Country and beyond? No, I don't. But I don't have to. I don't have to hold it in that same regard. Why? Like, for what purpose? Doesn't make any sense to me in that regard. Why am I wasn't going into it looking for that. Why should I have been going into it looking for that? You don't want to judge a book by its cover, but you can, especially as a longtime fan, level set yourself for what you're going to see. And you know what? If I'm better at that than a number of other fans, then so be it. It is what it is, right? But, I see people with this entitlement, right? And I talk about how these studios don't owe us anything and we choose to like it or not. And that's when somebody responds with, that type of mentality is how Battlefield Earth gets made. No, we're not owed anything. Okay, this is a business in this regard. They put out the content. We decide whether or not we enjoy it. We don't decide it. The times when fans decide things is when Justice League happens. Okay, plain and simple. Because that's when Warner Brothers decided to listen to fans that were gatekeeping Man of Steel and more than that, Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, and they created the Justice League disaster in 2017. That's what happens when fans are listened to. The 5 to 10%, if that, of the main audience. Never listen to us, because we are never 100% on board. We're never 100% pleased, and we are not the target audience. Seriously. I'm including myself on this. Okay, and I'm one of the more open-minded fans there is with respect to any of these franchises, especially Star Trek. Don't listen to me. Do not listen to me. I will take whatever art is presented to me from the Star Trek creators, and I will judge it subjectively accordingly in that regard. And, I will be fair, but I will always know that it is just my opinion and that I'm not right or wrong on that in that regard, right? That's just how I feel. And people are not right or wrong for liking or disliking Section 31, but this idea that they should listen to us and they should do what we say, bullshit. Absolute bullshit, because we don't know what the hell we're talking about most of the time. We think we do, but we don't, because we're not in the minds of the general audience that, they're trying to build up for this. We're in the minds of longtime fans that are so emotionally connected to these franchises that we can't see straight. Not in terms of a business sense, not in terms of what we think might draw in general audience goers to expand the audience of Star Trek. And no, I do not believe that expanding the audience of Star Trek dilutes the product either, because those original seasons of TNG and DS9 and Voyager and Enterprise and whatnot are all still there for consumption. I know, because I own more than a few of them, okay? They don't change any of those episodes or movies or whatnot that we already have, that we already grew up on, okay? So, whatever they decide to do, whatever Paramount decides to do with the general audience in mind to try and draw in new viewers, again, like my fiance, who did enjoy the film and has enjoyed Discovery and Strange New Worlds at this point, whatever they decide to do to try to bring those people in, so be it. It's their decision. And we will see, based on the general audience reaction, not the fan reaction, how they do and how this goes going forward. So that's why I say, you guys, whoever it is out there, the fans that are dive bombing this and just setting it on fire with your reviews, doesn't matter. Does not matter. What matters is the general audience, the uninitiated general audience. How much of them subscribe to Paramount Plus? How much of them watch it? That's what matters ultimately. So you can continue to spin your wheels and be as toxic and gatekeepery as you want. For those of you that continue to whine and cry, I will happily block you on Blue Sky. And again, just to clarify, has nothing to do with whether or not you like Section 31. Has everything to do with how you dislike Section 31 or not. There are plenty of people that I have not blocked that have said, I didn't care for it, it wasn't for me, but if other people enjoy it, I'm not going to, quote, yuck their yum, right? Those people are perfectly fine, because those people are at least respectful of other people's thoughts and other people's opinions. It's the people that are going, like, worst Trek ever, nothing like the franchise, yada, yada, yada. It's those people, those ridiculous-ass reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, and those ridiculous-ass people on Blue Sky, those are the people that are blocked. Those are the people that I want to hear nothing from, because those are the selfish-ass fan gatekeepers that I don't want to deal with. So people don't have to like Section 31 to not get blocked by me. Right? It's not a requisite. It's not what this is about. And people love to conflate that. People love to say, oh, well, Ray, you're just upset because people don't like. No, I'm upset with people being assholes. I don't like people being assholes about stuff that they dislike. It's really not that difficult. You can dislike whatever you want. Just don't be an asshole. It's not that hard. I know that the world is shitty as hell right now, but it doesn't cost that much to not be an asshole when you don't like something. It really doesn't. That's all I'm saying. Assholes get blocked. Non-assholes that still don't like it don't get blocked. Plain and simple. So that's all I really got to say about it, to be honest with you. And so that'll do it for my spoiler-free review of Star Trek Section 31 here on Flight Review, this particular episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for listening to me. Hopefully you understand where I'm coming from and know that I am not just, laying waste to anybody that doesn't like the film. If you did not like the film, that is fine. It's just about whether or not you're an asshole towards others who actually do like the film, or just an asshole in general about how much you didn't like the film. That's really all it has to do. That's really all that it's about. But if any of you have any thoughts with respect to this particular movie that you wish to share, whether you liked it or not, I am open to, dissenting opinions. If you really liked the movie, or if you really didn't like the movie, or if you thought the movie was meh. You know where to find me on Blue Sky at FlightCast. There's also the FlightCast Facebook page. And, of course, I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right. Till next time, take care, stay safe out there, and live long and prosper. All right. Take it easy.